Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday. I am humbly sitting here with the Money Man, who has been away for like 4 weeks on assignment, I believe, for the CIA, but I'm not positive. Money Man, how have you been?
I have been very good. How have you been?
Excellent. We missed you.
Well, thank you.
People have been walking around blindly, not knowing what to do with their wealth, confused, dazed. You are back since you've been gone. I believe the president seems to be in a little more complicated situation than he was before you left.
I think so. He is in a more complicated situation, and I have come to the point of view where I think it's time that we impeach this president. I think that he has been out of bounds. I think by soliciting interference in our domestic politics, he has committed an illegal act. The Federal Election Commission makes it very clear that it's illegal for anybody to solicit, accept, receive anything of value from a foreign national in connection with an American election. That was done. I think it's beyond the pale that any president or any American would go to the president or the head of another country and ask him to investigate an American citizen, let alone a political opponent, as a point of leveraging military aid, when Ukraine in many ways is the poster child and the symbolic thing for our relation with Russia. I can't explain this. I say this with profound sadness, seriously. I hate to see any president impeached, but his own transcript, the text messages, the evidence is all out there. I think Nancy Pelosi has done a good job thus far in handling it. I think they should stay on message, impeach him, and send it over to the Senate and see what happens.
Those are probably the strongest words uttered by a Republican in the state of Rhode Island?
Probably by a Republican in several states.
Probably by a Republican in several states. Certainly in the United States Senate, where none has uttered a critical word of the president.
The Sasses are doing pretty good. Ben Sasse of Nebraska was pretty strong. Romney finally,
But neither has come to the point of saying the man should be impeached.
They're in a different position than I'm in. I'm not in an elected position. I have a little more freedom in saying that. But they've come pretty close. But I don't have any reservation about saying that. I think what I'm most concerned about is how the government is being administered. Now, James Madison in Federalist Paper 65 said something that we all need to pay attention to. He said you should never remove a president for maladministration. That was the exact quote, maladministration.
Just being incompetent.
Yes, or disagreeing with him. You and I can have two different opinions. It doesn't make either of us incompetent, but only for high crimes and misdemeanors. So what I'm going to say right now is administration, but what was done today by just pulling our troops out of Syria and telling the Turks to come in risks genocide of our allies, who did a tremendous job in doing the fighting for us to get ISIS territory reduced. The Pentagon was shocked. People on both sides of the aisle were shocked. I don't know what the thought process is, but we're not dealing with a tax issue. We're not dealing with a state and local issue that if you make a mistake on, you can correct the next day. We're dealing with national security and foreign policy. And there is absolutely, I can't find a process. I can't find how the decision was vetted. The private phone calls he has with dictators, with Erdogan in Turkey is a good example. I think America has a right to know what he said to Erdogan in that conversation, because the policy today was a surprise to everyone. Well, that's not the way to run a democracy. It's not the way to protect the people in this country. That's not an impeachable offense. That's something I just happen to disagree with. I think most Americans would disagree with it. But there is a case to be made that he ignored the rule of law. The Federal Election Commission is very clear. And I think the legislature needs to get on with their job. I've come to this position lately. I didn't think that was a good idea to impeach an elected president, but I don't think there's any choice. And I know the argument is, well, it'll get to the Senate and there won't be enough votes to convict. Well, it's not that black and white, because if we can get 6 or 7 Republicans to go with the Democrats, that won't be enough to convict, but it'll be enough for a hearing and a trial. And McConnell won't be able to just dismiss it summarily. So I think it's reached that point. I think it's unfortunate, but I think I've been very direct with you on that.
He's going to, in all likelihood, be impeached by the House. I don't think there's a huge doubt about that. Probably beginning of 2020.
Maybe before that, maybe after Thanksgiving. But yes, you're right.
The Senate, though, you know, I mean, you talk about Romney and Sasse saying stronger words than anyone else or than their peers within the Republican Senate, but no one's come forward. One senator and voiced consistently strong admonishment of the president.
No, but it's there's a strategy and a tactic, and it's one day at a time. And there's no question that the probability of getting 20 Republican votes to impeach, and you need about 20 votes with the Democrat votes to get 66 or 67, whatever the number required is a long stretch.
Yeah.
And you know, anybody that has any betting vision would not make that bet. But there are a couple of steps that can be employed. You know, the first step is to get 5 or 6 Republicans, because if you get Republicans like Cory Gardner in Colorado, who has a tough election, Susan Collins in Maine, who has a tough election, Ben Sasse, Romney, Mike Lee, there are a few of them. Then McConnell won't be able to summarily dismiss it and have a one-day trial.
Right.
There'll be a real trial. What happens when the trial starts? Still a long shot, but it's the next step you take in the game. It's like where you have first and 30. Chances are you're not going to make a first down, but don't mean you don't win the next 3 plays. So there's a tactic and a strategy there. Some Republicans at risks, and so we'll see. But you can't get there until you do the House impeachment, and I just think there's plenty of grounds, for it. To go out on the White House driveway and say, well, China ought to investigate the Bidens as well. That's interesting. And I know Hunter Biden has had a sordid, career. But what the president didn't say, that he has 2 kids working in the White House that have a lot of dealings with foreign governments. And I don't see, I don't know what the Trump bank account looks like, but I see a lot of people using Trump facilities, and there are certain constitutional considerations about that. So it's the kettle should not call the pot black in that regard.
Surprisingly, not that the economy has been fairly stable during this period of time. You'll have a 500-point swing on the market, and then the next day it'll be back up 350 or 400 or 500. It's been relatively stable. The concern seems to be much more economically not about governance, but about trade policy.
Yeah. Well, the economy is very interesting, and so the U.S. economy is holding up despite a global slowdown, and there are conflicting signals being sent. The job growth in September was modest, but we upgraded the employment numbers for July and August. Unemployment is at a 50-year low. That's one side. On the other hand, in 2018, we grew about 223,000 jobs a month. Now it's about 161,000. But there's still job growth. The unemployment is low. And the figure I look at, which is I think, much more important than some of these figures, is the unemployment figure for people who are part-time and want full-time work, or people that are underemployed. And that level is 6.9%. That's down. That was down about 7.2, 7.3%.
Yeah.
So the job numbers are very good. At the same time,
and also, just for clarification, at some point you can't get 223,000 new jobs. When you have record unemployment, you just can't continue the job growth. There's not the workforce to be had.
So while the economy is slowing down, those numbers don't indicate any sign of a recession. On the other hand, manufacturing has had the last 2 months the slowest rate of growth in 10 years, since 2009. Service industry is still expanding, though at a more modest rate. So you get these mixed signals, and I don't think any economist with those mixed signals can say there's going to be a recession. They can say there's going to be a slowdown. Now, the big if in the ointment is the president's policies himself.
Right.
And what could throw the ship onto the rocks is trade policy. The tariffs, the Tax Foundation, a conservative group, pointed out that the Tax Foundation is the equivalent to one of the largest tax increases in our history. And so you have this uncertainty about trade, and if you had an administration that was on top of the game, the economy, like I say, is slowing down, but it's not going into recession as I can see, but there's so much uncertainty. And uncertainty is the worst thing. So that's one reason manufacturing may be slowing down, because somebody's reluctant to make an investment in product at this point. So, but the U.S. economy is it's holding its own in a downward global spiral.
Rhode Island's economy somewhat mirrors the country's. It's not quite as robust on every indicator, but unemployment remains low. No uptick over the past year.
But there's some certain things we could look at in the Rhode Island economy that should give us pause. Employment is right, and I'll speak about that in a minute. The consensus forecast that was published by the Revenue Estimating Conference is dismal. It has almost no employment growth between 2021 and 2026. It has unemployment increasing to 5% over that period of time. So that consensus forecast is there's some issues. The issue, though, is the growth in the GDP and the economy.
Sure.
So we had a conference at Bryan, and we looked at growth in GDP between 2014 and 2018, the latest figures that we had. And the Rhode Island economy grew by 3.4%. National economy by 10.2%.
Yeah.
Massachusetts by almost 12%. In the first quarter of 19, Bryant study showed that the economy in Rhode Island was growing at 1.7%. So our economy is lagging, and this is where it gets really interesting. As you pointed out, our job growth is not lagging. We're doing pretty good. Between January and June of this year, we grew 7,000 jobs. The unemployment rate dropped from about 4% to 3.6%. We're losing manufacturing employment is not good, business services is not good, but education, health services, hospitality are doing fine. And that shows that, and I'm reasoning there's a confluence of that information which surely shows what the problem is. And the problem is that we have sluggish GDP, we have sluggish overall economic growth, but we have decent employment growth. And that tells me that there's a low labor productivity index that is having a negative effect on certain sectors of the economy. And that is the issue in this state, is productivity. And we have to develop a productivity agenda, innovation agenda. And we've talked about this for a long time. Are we investing, did we invest too much in real estate and capital and not enough in innovation? And some of those birds are coming home to roost right now. So the problem in this state is the economy is not going to go into recession. Employment numbers not great, but they're good. But the decline and the slow growth, the lagging growth in the GDP, which is lagging behind the country in Massachusetts and most of the rest of New England, indicates that we have a productivity problem.
Rhode Island's got some complexities related to its state budget, and one that really is starting to, I think, worry the governor, legislative leaders, is the performance of revenue in the lottery sector tied to the performance of Twin River and what Encore has done to it, coupled with the almost non-performance of sports betting.
Yep.
The audit just came out today. The number that had previously been reported was that the state didn't make $23.5 million in last fiscal year. It had made $6.8 million, except when you zero out the cost of marketing, that number drops to $3 million. So we were only off by $20.5 million off the $23.5 million. But also Encore's impact across the board on especially Twin River Lincoln seems to be fairly significant. They've had layoffs, et cetera. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, let me take one step back, and I will talk about that. If you look at what's happened to Rhode Island spending in the last 8 to 10 years, you see that our level of spending has grown faster than our income has grown, and it's grown faster than inflation. And so in order to keep up, we were like dogs in heat. We were running around looking for new revenue. And so the one major new revenue source was gambling. I was director of revenue when the previous owners went into bankruptcy and
Right.
restructured, and Twin River had a pretty good run. We knew the lottery games themselves were slipping because the market was changing. And so we became very dependent. The market in New England, if it's not becoming saturated, certainly the competition is becoming more intense. And this is what happens, when you put too many eggs in one basket because you won't deal with the spending issue.
Right.
The basic issue wasn't that the gambling money is going down. The basic issue is that we thought it would go on forever, and it doesn't. And we did nothing for the last 12 years to do.
And there had been plenty of warnings. There had been plenty of reports by third party preceding Encore coming online. And we seemed to dodge bullets. Plain Ridge never inflicted the pain that we thought it would. But Encore's a different animal. It's a real operator, it's a real facility, and it is really taking revenue away from Rhode Island.
Well, and also the technology, other states can do the same technology.
Absolutely.
I could sit in my kitchen, I don't gamble, but I could go sports betting in several states. I don't have to go sports betting here necessarily. Now that's why, this brings us to another controversial issue. That's why the IGT contract is so important, because it's going to have a great deal to say whether or not we can maximize our revenue. And I don't think there's any argument that IGT machines have underperformed the competition. I think the information that Twin River put out, that we get about $30,000 less per machine is pretty accurate. That's why even the machines at Tiverton, even the IG machines at Tiverton, are not performing as well as the competition. And so what do you do in this contract? And there are a couple of salient issues that I think are important and should be discussed. The first is, and this is a philosophical argument, but effectively this contract would give one company a monopoly, 85% of the machines. So keep in mind when Kachiri...
I think that number's incorrect. I'm pretty sure that's been pared down to 50% now.
well, I don't...
Of actual IGT, they will contract for the other
that's
manufacturers.
Right, but they control 85%
Right.
of the machines. That's what I meant by monopoly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've always used those machines. But that's a question. And so GTEC or IGT is not the only company that employs people. This always happens to us. This is not
Mitt Romney.
not the only company that employs people.
But let me ask about the monopoly side. Right now, we've got Twin River licensed to operate the two states' casinos. They're not a technology company. They wouldn't say they're a technology company. They're a casino company. They're a casino operator. And they are responsible for a significant portion of the state's revenue. Tied to that is they've got some troubles. They need to upgrade, they need to compete with Encore. Why would we give them more business in an area in which they have no expertise?
Well, there are different ways that you could reach this deal. So there are two ways to go about, getting this done. And I don't know why 20 years makes any sense in this technology age that we're in. But, one is to go...
Who negotiated that last one in 2003?
This was different. But
Is your fingerprints on that
No,
2003
no,
agreement?
We'll give Mike the credit. But there's two ways to go about it. One is to do a bidding process, and the second is a negotiated process. I personally believe, from a good government perspective, you want to do things with as arm's length transaction as you can. Let's say in this case there are not enough vendors and you can't. Then there ought to be a transparent negotiation, and it's not all that complicated. There are things that you could do to help both companies.
Mm-hmm.
One, for example, what if IGT got 60% of the machines instead of 85% of the machines? What if the jobs they created were 250% of the minimum wage instead of 150%? So both sides can sit down, and it could become a win-win for both sides.
You don't get a sense that that's where we're going. Mark Christofouli was on with Kate Friday, I think, in an interview, and you got a sense of this is no longer smash mouth demolition derby head-to-head, that it's going to be some type of structure that's more appropriate for the strengths of each company.
Well, hopefully, the legislature will, you will lead. The governor hasn't led. She threw a proposal out. And I will discuss the merits of that proposal. There are things in that proposal that are probably pretty good. There are others that are questionable. But it's really important because they're two important Rhode Island companies. It's not one Rhode Island company. It's not
Absolutely.
It's not just 1,000 jobs that IGT has. It's the jobs that Twin River has. It's getting better jobs in there. It's making certain that the taxes paid by people who are in those jobs at least equals the subsidies that are given each year. There are questions about whether we're overpaying on the contract, all legitimate questions. But there's not one of those questions that if you had people of goodwill in the room, you couldn't reach a compromise on. You mentioned that Twin River is having problems. Well, you're not going to help Twin River solve problems if the company that manages the core technology that powers the casinos and has the lottery games has a monopoly. That doesn't add accountability to anything. And so I think I think when you look at all the issues, if you get to the point where you can't bid because you don't feel there can be enough qualified bidders, and I don't think that's the case. I prefer bidding, but if that's the decision made, I can live with that. Then the fallback position is to have a public, transparent negotiations, not a total backroom negotiations, and go into the negotiations with the paradigm that we're going to help both Twin River and we're going to help IGT because they're both important Rhode Island companies. And you and I could probably sit here in 15 minutes and identify the issues.
What was interesting in the hearings last week on the House side before House Finance was one piece of data that came out which raises question not about IGT or Twin River, which is the underperformance by the Lottery Commission. I think everybody has respect for Jerry Aubin, but we're the lowest per capita sellers of tickets. By far and away over any other New England state. Really wasn't close. Some of the states 50% more tickets sold. Is that a subject to, they've had that billboard on 95 for 3,000 years. They have the promos with the bouncing balls during Wheel of Fortune for the last 3,000 years. The world has changed. The world is not driven by billboards on 95 and spiraling balls during Wheel of Fortune anymore. Does that need to be looked at? That there just needs to be a refreshing and an upgrading of the overall marketing to make Rhode Island more competitive?
Well, I used to have the lottery as an agency that reported to me when I was in state government, and that was always an issue of what you were willing to spend and take away from the state on promotion and advertising. And certainly it can be refreshed and updated, but don't lose sight of the basic fact that a lot of games run by the lottery, the scratch games, et cetera, were creatures of 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can advertise till the cows come
Yeah,
home.
no, it needs a revamp. The games need to change.
The technology is different, sports online. We've created competition to those games. So that's part of the problem. I'm not up to speed on what advertising we are doing, but I do know this. I do feel this. I'm not sure I know it, that in the gambling business today, because it's so highly competitive, the way you advertise and the way you promote is critical. And one of the issues that Twin Rivers had, which I think was an issue that I confronted when I was in state government, is trying to figure out ways where we can forego revenue in the short run to give them more money for promotions. If you want to compete with Massachusetts, our promotions don't compete with Massachusetts.
No.
So if a guy's not going to just wander in if he can get great promotions.
I will say this, we came back from a trip, landed in Logan. We saw 2 billboards for Twin River in Boston promoting. Now, I'm sorry, there is no person in the Boston metro area who is not going to go to Encore, but is going to drive down 95, cut over to 146 to go to Twin River. I don't know. It just seems a little illogical.
I think that the point I would agree, the competition is
It's
bad. We have to increase promotions. We got to do everything we can to get people into these places. Though I say that, I don't gamble and I don't like gambling. It's always an ethical issue.
How much did you lose this weekend on Florida State?
Didn't play this week.
Oh, so you cut down your losses this week.
Never bet. Never bet on. You never bet with the heart. Never.
So you bet Alabama.
You can't get, you got to give 65 points. Why would you want to do that?
Thank you, Money Man. We're so glad you're
Not a
back.
problem.
It's great to
Great to be
have
back.
you. Thanks for making some significant news today. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow. Kate Nagel will be hosting the afternoon show. And we might be live over at the Convention Center with one of the America's leading presidential historians, a well-timed visit to the RIPEC dinner. Thanks, everybody. See you later.